So, folks, we're back with another Titans card review, and we got some Druid cards this time, and we've got some OP cards this time. I really think Druid dude always gets big, crazy, awesome stuff. Last few days of reviews, I've been a little more, middling on some of these class cards, but Druid, man, these seem really, really good. So kicking it off here is Freya, Keeper of Nature. She is a new 8 mana 4/6 for Druid, and she's got to choose one effect here. Number one, you can duplicate your hand. So that used to be an effect on, remember the old Elise card? If you had no duplicates, you could duplicate your hand. That was always a really powerful effect, getting either tons of value or making extra copies of, cheesy cards you otherwise couldn't, getting your extra Zephyrus or whatever. And secondary for Freya, we've also got or summon copies of all other friendly minions. So in other words, duplicate your board. So you get to duplicate your hand or duplicate your board. Now, this is an 8 mana card, which, that always looks intimidating at first glance, but I'll remind you as always, this is Druid. 8 mana cards for Druid really often feel more like 6 mana cards, at least in how quickly they can come down in a given game, given the various ways for Druid to accelerate into mana faster than others. This might be something you're playing on 6 or 7 reliably, not necessarily on turn 8. Of course, it will still cost 8 mana later in the game too, so it eats up a big chunk of your turn. But there are a couple really specific things I want to talk about already that make this card look insane to me. Number one is the Titan for Druid A&R, the Lifebinder. You'll remember this one has the 3 special abilities, one of which, here we go. This draws cards until your hand is full. This restores your health to full, and this refreshes your mana crystals. So this one in particular, when you play A&R, you can refresh your mana crystals, which means, hey, guess what? You're going to have 8 mana, and then you can use Freya here to copy your A&R, the Lifebinder. But remember that A&R has also already summoned you a 5/5 because when you played it and used the ability, so you've got a 5/7 and a 5/5 on board. Then you're going to play Freya with your refreshed mana. She's going to make you another 5/5 and a 5/7, and she, of course, herself is a 4/6, so you're up to 5 minions on board with this single play. They're all really big and crazy. And then you're getting a second A&R, and that card is going to have 2 abilities remaining, which means that after doing all that, you can actually just draw cards until your hand is full, or still restore your hero to full health. And when you do that, you know what? That A&R is also going to summon you a 5/5, so you're going to end up with a completely insane board. You're gonna have either a full hand or full health, and that's just Druid stuff, right? That's just Druid doing Druid things, these crazy kind of turns, which admittedly for a lot of classes would happen too late in the game, but for Druid, I think that's just going to be another one of many ways for them to absolutely reload these crazy boards. This is a strategy that's worked pretty well for Druid. Ramping up the mana and then building these like aggressively big boards that the opponents just can't deal with. It just overwhelms so many different decks, while still generating other cards and resources and, still doing lots of other things. So, it's not like that's their all-in game plan. It's a way to steal wins, but then they've got backups and got other ways to reload and other ways to build another big wave of boards. So this is just one of many different pushes. Now, obviously, you're not always going to have A&Rs. The question is Freya going to be worth it in other instances? I think so. There's plenty of ways for Druid to get these kind of 0 mana cards that they can get into play. You got the Crypt dudes that get cheaper with armor, for instance, right now. Play a couple of those, and Freya will allow you to, while developing a 4/6, develop even more of those guys and build out a gigantic board. What are those called? I can't think of their name right now. Crypt Keeper. Oh, that's the name. Crypt Dudes is really, really accurate. So, get a couple of these down. Freya allows you to duplicate all those. Again, a monster board out of nowhere, right? Because you're able to turn all these 0 mana cards into extra copies of things with Freya. So, I think there will be plenty of moments and opportunities for this to be good as the summon a copy side of the card. And then also, we haven't even talked about the duplicate your hand side of the card, which is already also potentially very, very good. If you're at all in a game where you can afford to spend 8 mana to generate some value, imagine all the cool extra things you can make copies of on the back of this Choose One. So, I mean, that's got potential broken angles. The copies, I think, are fantastic. Works really well with other cards we've already seen. To me, this card just looks like a really good fit for the things that Druid wants to do. Looks really strong, and we're actually going to see even more synergies in this video. So next up here, we've got Forest Seedlings. This is a new 1-mana spell. It's going to summon you 2 1/1 saplings, or it blossoms in 2 turns. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you keep the Forest Seedlings in hand for 2 turns, it's got to be in hand, it's going to change. It's going to transform into Forest Blossoms, as you can see, which summons you 2 treants instead of 1/1 saplings. So your minions basically get twice as big, but also the text there is important because treants, I think, will have treant synergy, whereas saplings will not have treant synergy, which we're going to get some treant synergy in this very video. So that is going to be an important distinction. If you want to realize that synergy, you might have to wait, which does feel a little bit weird for a 1-mana spell. This is the sort of thing normally you'd want to get going as soon as you can, get these in play, get this initiative rolling. And, you know, at 1 mana, it's not hard to weave into turns to do that. So saving it's going to feel like, I want to get going, I want to get moving. I could see some urgency there, but it may indeed be worth it to transform these based on their name, perhaps more than their stats. If you were only getting a stat upgrade, I don't know that it would be worth it. Sometimes getting 1/1s down faster and interacting with those sooner would be better. But at the end of the day, 2 2/2s for 1 mana is very efficient and is going to have some synergies. And of course, we know Token Druid is an archetype that has certainly worked many times in the past. This is all pointing towards a little bit more of a slower Token Druid. We've seen some of those like hyper aggressive ones that are dumping as much stuff as they can. We've also in the past, though, seen some of the more mid-game Token Druids, I would call them, where they're trying to build these big boards on turn 5 or 6 or 7, or maybe all 3 of those in a row, overwhelming the opponent with stuff in the mid-game and then leveraging that with big buffs. So this is, to me, pointing a little bit more towards that second angle because these Blossom cards are going to want to be waiting. So when you top deck this, you might be a little sad because it's going to take forever. But if this is sitting in hand early in the game, it might actually line up really well for the power band of a more mid-game focused Treant Druid. So this is interesting, right? It's interesting. Let's take a look at the rest of the Treant cards because that'll add some more context here. For instance, we've got Conservator Nymph here. This is a 3-mana 3/4 with Battle Cry. Transform a friendly treant into a 5/5 ancient with Taunt. So you take one of your small guys and make them into a meteor guy, and you're getting a 3-mana 3/4 alongside it. And you know, I think this is actually pretty decent if you manage to stick a tree into turn 3. Or maybe if you combine your Forest Blossoms on turn 4 with Conservator Nymph. This could be a pretty big board development, right? That would be a 2/2, a 5/5, and a 3/4 on turn 4, which is a lot of stuff, and it goes pretty wide too, so it could be pretty awkward to deal with. I will say sometimes these 5/5 ancient buffs are somewhat clunky because if you're buffing a card on board, especially if it's a card that is able to attack, like something that's stuck on turn 2 into turn 3, the fact that you're giving it, you know, a 3/3 buff in essence, it can't take trades with that because it's a new minion. It's a transform, so it can't attack. It can't use the stats to push face damage or take a value trade, for instance. So it does feel worse than a buff would in many cases. But it's still just big, and it does have taunt, which is nice because it's going to force your opponent's hand a little bit to interact through this ancient. So, you know, not as good as we might like in some cases, but still, I think the potential to build a big board in combination with these cards is definitely there. Speaking of that, we've got Cultivation here, a new 8-mana spell. It is a nature spell, which is important sometimes, and it gives your minions +2/+2, and it costs 1 less for each treant you've summoned this game. So after a couple Forest Blossoms, this is, you know, a 4-mana spell that gives your minions +2/+2, which still isn't great, but you know, you get this down to 3, you get this down to 2, you get this down to 0, then you're cooking, right? Then you can do some pretty cool stuff here with Cultivation. And you know, it's going to need to be in a treant deck. It's not a card you're going to see elsewhere because, of course, you have to get those cost discounts to make this one feel really good. And then it's a great, you know, follow-up. It's both burst damage sometimes, it's board development sometimes, whatever you need in a given matchup. This can absolutely be that Savage Roar sometimes, or just if you're playing a deck you don't expect to have wide board removal, just develop your board, get those stats down now, and just punch them normally next turn, maybe even with a second Cultivation, who knows. So yeah, this is the definite kind of follow-up and support card you need for Treant Druid. I am a little bit worried about hitting a critical mass of enough Treants right now to make this good. As far as Treant cards that we currently have in standard, I mean, you can see a handful. Natural Causes, we got the buffed Witchwood Apple. Remember, these Treants, you get 2 of them in hand and they cost 1. So this is one way to get a couple cheap Treants. This guy costs health instead of mana, so you can accelerate him out. Plot of Sin still chilling. So there's a few, but it's not like, it's not an excess. It's not like, overflowing with Treants in this case. So I don't know. I'm a little bit worried about this starting at 8, instead of like 6 or something. That maybe it's a little expensive given the number of Treants we have. Seems like insane in duels, but standard might be tough to get there. So final sort of Treant synergy card we got here is the Ancient of Growth. This is a 7 mana 5/5. You got choose one here, summon 3 2/2 Treants, or transform your Treants into 5/5 Ancients with Taunt. And again, this is kind of 2 things we talked about. This is more of a mid-game development. 7's trending towards late game, you would argue. And we got these ancient transformations again with Taunt. Same story here. Sometimes that doesn't feel as good as just a buff would. If I've got a board of Treants, I'm really happy to transform, or if I've got a board of Treants stuck behind, I wish I could buff them and turn them into immediate stats that are pushing face, that are taking trades. Just upgrading them into 5/5s, it's cool, but it's so late in the game at that stage. Like, it's 7 mana here for this card that I don't know that I feel like I'm getting enough out of those stats. I'd rather, if I stuck a board, just really leverage that advantage and try to end the game, as opposed to just kind of keep this plan rolling along, right? I want to turn the corner. I want to go. I want to end, as opposed to just, okay, here's another board of stuff. Here's another board of stuff. That can whittle people down, but it also just opens you up to removal. Suddenly they found, a Soul Stealer on turn 8, and these 5/5s that I transformed, okay, they're just dead now, instead of like helping me into the game or kill the opponent. And then, the development here, if you're choosing to summon Treants out of this, doesn't feel very good. I think for turn 7, getting 3 2/2s and a 5/5, we talked about the same sort of board almost on turn 4 being possible, right? So real diminishing returns here, I think, on the choose one. It is noteworthy that this card getting doubled up. We're going to take a look at a card a little later here, Disciple of Anar, that can double your choose one effects. That's kind of insane here. Getting both of these is nice. Suddenly that's 4 5/5s. But I don't know if the card like this fits very well in a token Treant deck. That might be an awkward fit. We've also got that spell, the Embrace of Nature, that we got revealed earlier. Could do a similar sort of thing with the Ancient of Growth, but again, more investment into a card, but I think maybe mediocre payoff. So this doesn't really look like the most exciting Treant support card. I think the rest make a little bit more sense in my brain. This one seems just a little lower power level overall. And then next up here, we have the Frost Lotus Seedling, a 3 mana spell. It's a nature spell again, which can be important. And it's going to draw you 1 card and gain you 4 armor at a base. I don't think you're in love with that play at a base. That doesn't sound very good. But if you wait 3 turns, it's going to draw you 2 cards and gain you 8 armor, which definitely feels better. A big 8 armor gain can be important. We've still got some armor synergies, of course, in Druid. Things like Crypt Keepers getting cheated out can be very useful. And then, drawing 2 cards is never a bad thing. The Arcane Intellect there with a bonus. But in some ways, I still feel bad about this because that blossoming aspect, that's sort of punishing for card draw. Sometimes you need card draw to work right now. I need the cards now. I top deck this. I want to reload my hand. I don't want to wait 3 turns. And this isn't like crazy hyper efficient card draw. Druid has a lot of ways to draw cards and can do so with some big payoffs on some cases. So do you want to sit around and wait on your Frost Lotus Blossom? I don't know. I'm hesitant to say. There's so many other good ways to draw, so many other good ways to gain armor, that this feels like sticking those 2 together, but not particularly optimal. It's efficient from a slot standpoint. It only takes 1 card to do multiple things, but it doesn't feel especially efficient from an output standpoint. I feel like Druid can do better than the Frost Lotus Seedling and Blossom here. That delay, I think, is actually rather punishing for this card. Moving on here to Lifebinder's Gift. This is a new 2 mana nature spell for Druid. To choose one, you get 2 random nature spells, or you reduce the cost of spells in your hand by 1. So actually, some really nice cost reduction there. And that can be useful in 2 different ways. Number 1, late in the game, if you've accrued a big spell hand, You can use this to make them all cheaper and then just blow up and overwhelm the opponent with all kinds of cheap spells, sometimes extracting other synergies along the way when doing so. Or alternatively, you can actually just use this little bit of ramp, you know, hitting your Nourish with a Lifebinder's Gift allows you to spend turn 2 as if a ramp card and then play your Nourish a turn early on turn 4, or, you know, whatever other example you'd like to cheat things out. And of course, you can get multiple copies of these to do certain things even faster, getting big spells into play much sooner than you might otherwise be able to, which is all really useful. And then sometimes if you need to, if you're just in a pinch and you don't really care about mana discounts much, I don't think getting 2 nature spells off this is too bad either. Just generating some resources. We've got things like Topior, don't forget, still floating around in standard format. So a nature spell druid kind of makes sense in that regard. So this again looks like a really, really good card. Mana cheat's awesome, and the backup plan on this isn't too bad either. So next up here, to support all these choose one cards we've seen, we've actually got the Disciple of Aenar here, a new 4-mana 4/4. With a battle cry, your next choose one card has both effects combined. So we already saw Lifebinder's Gift. That's actually insane. You get 2 random nature spells. You're going to discount those immediately alongside everything else in your hand. So that's awesome on ANR, frankly. And this is by no means the best result. You also got Freya, don't forget. This is also crazy. Duplicate your hand and your board if you play this after playing a Disciple of Aenar, which is pretty nuts. And we're actually going to see another card here that's not bad either. The Ancient of Growth is going to summon you, 4 5/5s basically, if that's the card you hit off Aenar. And then we've got classic examples too, like Nourish, I think is probably the best example. This on 4 into Nourish on turn 5. That is actually insane. Ramp a ton, draw 3 cards to fill your hand, get that 2 mana back immediately off Nourish. That is an insane turn 4 into turn 5 that feels like a reason enough to run this card very often. That just seems really, really good. I mean, I will acknowledge that sometimes if you're playing ramp in the early game, that, so if you're like playing, Wild Growth on 3 or whatever, you're going to be skipping the ANR turns in some cases, but this is still fine late in the game as well. It doesn't even suck late in the game because you've got all these other choose one effects that can still be really good and useful. You don't have to hit the perfect Nourish thing. There's still plenty of upside. And yes, a 4-mana 4/4 is not exciting to play. That is indeed a downturn. I think a lot of decks would have a harder time taking those downturns. But in Druid, I fear that less. They have so many ways to counter swing boards so hard and so dramatically. They can develop taunts really affordably. It's things we've already talked about a lot. That I think recovering off the Disciple of Aenar is not going to be a problem at all. I mean, just look at something like Drum Circle we saw last set, right? I mean, think about this card after the Disciple of Aenar to stabilize, right? This summons 5, 4, 6 taunts because you've played Disciple of Aenar before it, and this maybe costs 5 mana because you've already played a couple of your spell discounts, right? It's all coming together to this just like overwhelming pile of crazy stuff that's happening way too affordably and easily because it's Druid. Freya, Keeper of Nature, is a 4-star card. Lifebinder's Gift is a 4-star card. Disciple of Aenar is a 4-star card. Ancient Growth is a 2-star card. Forest Seedlings is a 3-star card. Conservator Nymph is a 3-star card. Cultivation is a 3-star card. Frost Lotus Seedling is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for our Druid reviews. What do you think about these cards? Is Druid busted like always? I particularly like this sort of Freya side of things. The Treant side, I don't see coming together right now. I think we need more of those. Maybe in the future, another expansion could support that a little more. It could get there eventually. I think the power levels on the cards are fine. It's just missing pieces. Needs some more support to really get it the help it needs. But I like the other half of this a lot. Freya seems insane. Seems like there's some busted combos possible. So some very powerful cards indeed. But curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.